found this diagram of a couple strolling in the park. Thought I would print it up and trace it using Logic Trace. First thing we're going to do here is select the 4 points by selecting the 4 corners of the diagram. Because of the nature of this diagram and the details, I'll probably be using the trace command more than ever. What makes this a doable project, I always talk about this, is the size of the diagram. I'm tracing a large diagram. It's about 32 inches long and about 26 inches wide. Which sort of means that any small part is not that small to trace. What's different about this project, this tracing, is that I have to trace each part. So when you look at the diagram as it's being traced, it looks double traced. And that's because each one of those parts will have to be removed to be cut by the laser. When I finally have finished my tracing, I want to be able to remove each part because I'm going to be using cedar, birch, walnut, and mahogany to do the different colors on the diagram, because this diagram is going to be all natural colors. So in other words, when I'm finished and I've created my final file, I'll load that file into software and I'll break up all the parts. So in other words, I'll break up the woman's clothing and the man's clothing separately, and I'll cut all those pieces out of different species of wood and then put them together like a puzzle. Now the dimension here is that I did have a bit of a problem saving my work, so I ended up having to retrace just the top of the diagram and creating 2 files, and then taking software, applying the 2 files and putting them together. I messed up the heads at the top of the diagram. You'll see further on where I pick up that file, place it on top of the whole other picture, and it turned out just fine. But this does show the accuracy of the tracing software, the Logic Trace, because you're able to make 2 files, combine them together with software, and they lined up perfectly. Getting close here to finishing up the tracing, so I'll end up with 2 files, and I'm going to use some software to combine these files and also separate the parts. Shown here, I've loaded in the first original file, and then I'm going to bring in the second file and lay it on top. You can see there where I'm putting it on. Very simple alignment, just cut and paste. Also, I'm going to show the simulation of how the cut's going to look. The first cut shown here, I'll be cutting out the background. I'm using pine panels for the background around the 2 figures. From here you can see why I needed to separate all those parts, because I need to cut each part separately and then put it back together again just like a puzzle. I was able to use some of the scrap pieces for some of the small parts. What I'm doing here is I'm scribing out the whole project. This is the background of the plaque. So this is where I'll be applying all the parts, so I'll know where to put the parts. So I'm just cutting this down about a 1/16 of an inch deep. I call that a scribe cut. So it gives me a template to lay out all the parts. Shown here, I'm cutting out the woman's clothing from red oak 1/4 inch panel. Again, you can see where I'm cutting all those parts out separately. This is a full picture of the template. This cuts a birch 1/4 inch panel for the man's clothing. I also cut a second birch panel because the man's clothing was quite long. And this cut is a walnut panel. That's going to be for the hat and for the shoes. And this cut is a 1/4 inch cedar panel, and that's for the woman's hair. Shown here, I've started to glue the pieces to that template panel. I also applied about a 3 inch cedar frame around the whole project, and I've given it 4 coats of lacquer and some sanding. Looks good.